You know about the Punic Wars? Most don't, yet they affected the rest of the world as we know it. These conflicts were between Carthage and Rome and were the biggest wars of their time, like our world wars. Rome was an early America with its melting pot of people, traditions, and religions passed on from all of their conquered peoples. They were unlike Carthage, who had child sacrificial gods to worship. If Rome hadn't won these wars, we wouldn't have many of their gifts like architecture, roads, philosophy, art, and languages. Yet most surprisingly, if Rome hadn't participated in these wars, they wouldn't have become the world empire that later showed the world unity and order under one government. Began in Messana, Sicily. The city was conquered by the Italian mercenaries called the Mamertines. The Mamertines began pillaging the countryside, and the king of Syracuse attempted to dislocate them. The Mamertines asked Carthage for help, who agreed on the condition that they would have a garrison in charge at Messana. This did not go well. They then asked Rome for assistance when Carthage refused to leave. Rome hesitated, but thought their better of it, as they did not love the idea of having the Carthaginians controlling a seaport 2 miles away from their homeland. Rome conquered Messana, and Syracuse surrendered. The war between Carthage and Rome raged for 23 years of back-and-forth losses, with the control of Sicily hanging in the balance. The Carthaginians had an excellent navy, but were weak on land. Rome was an excellent land force, however they were not well equipped on sea. Each strengthened their weaknesses and became a strong opponent on land and sea. Rome built naval ships based on the design of a shipwrecked Carthaginian ship. They learned sea strategies and invented a corvus gangplank, which allowed them to attach themselves to other ships and turned it into a land battle at sea. They won 2 important sea battles at Mylae and Cape Ecnomus. On the other hand, Carthage learned land battle strategies. When the Romans moved the war to Africa and began decimating the countryside, the Carthaginians began using war elephants and defeated 13,000 Romans with only 800 soldiers. They also began using guerrilla war tactics thanks to their war general, Hamilcar Barca. By the end, Rome and her allies suffered the loss of over 400,000 soldiers, but Rome won the last major battle at sea, called the Battle of Agates Island. Carthage was financially strapped, so they surrendered Sicily and sued for peace. Carthage was made to pay 3,200 talents, approximating $45.2 million today. They had no money to pay their hired mercenaries, so Hamilcar Barca was sent to conquer Hispania, which is rich in silver mines. Rome emerged a stronger country with a superior navy and skill for traders, but rivalry and hatred still festered against Rome. Hamilcar had his oldest son Hannibal swear a blood oath to hate and never make friends with Rome. This set the stage for the Second Punic War. After his father's death, Hannibal became a general. In 219 BC, he seized Saguntum, a long-standing ally of Rome. Saguntum begged Rome for help. By crossing the Ebro River, Rome declared Carthage in violation of the treaty signed by Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal. Rome demanded that Hannibal be turned over. Refusing, Carthage prepared for war in March 218 BC. Knowing Rome's intent to plan a sea attack on Carthage and pin him there, Hannibal decided to use the element of surprise by trekking through the uncrossable Alps. He wanted to cut the ornate web of allies in Italy because Rome was becoming too big and powerful. Hannibal wanted to show Carthage as a mighty power to renegotiate peace treaty terms more favorable to Carthage. He did not intend to destroy Rome. He crossed the Alps in late 218 BC with 38,000 men, 8,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. This bold, never-been-done-before move resulted in great consequences, losing a third of his army, his eye, and up to half of his irreplaceable war elephants due to harsh conditions and skirmishes with hostile Gallic tribes. Using this element of unthinkable surprise, Hannibal inflicted 2 devastating defeats in Italy, one being an ambush at the Battle of Trebia, where they killed 30,000 Romans. Rome had several disadvantages. It was the winter solstice, the coldest day of the year. They had not slept, were lured through a frosted river, had to stand in formation for hours, hadn't eaten, and been terrified by the beasts called elephants. The second crushing defeat was at Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal demonstrated his mastery of guerrilla battlefield tactics by ambushing 40,000 Roman soldiers, killing 15,000, and capturing 10,000 for slaves. After these defeats, Rome began to worry and elected Fabius Maximus as Rome's dictator, who, realizing Hannibal's battle superiority, avoided all direct confrontations. He shadowed Hannibal, following always on superior ground and picking off small detachments of Carthaginians. This limited Hannibal's movements and stretched his resources. This is called the Fabian tactics. This was not favorable to bloodthirsty Roman senators, as Hannibal also used psychological manipulation framing Fabius. As the soldiers looted and burned the countryside, he purposely avoided any lands belonging to Fabius, making people wonder if they had a secret agreement. Hannibal was adept at using spies as guides to gain intelligence. It backfired when he instructed his spies to take him to Casinum. Misunderstanding, they took him to Casilium, whose horrid terrain posed a problem of escape. Knowing the Romans were close, he decided to slip away under the cloak of darkness. They tied sticks to 2,000 oxen's horns, lit them on fire, and drove them among the Romans, igniting shrubbery along the way. Many Romans thought themselves surrounded and abandoned their posts. Fabius refused to battle at night, and all who fled were killed by the enemy. The Romans suffered great losses, while Carthage's losses were insignificant. Frustrated, the Romans elected a co-dictator, an unprecedented and unheard of thing to do, named Lucius Minucius Rufus, who wanted a direct confrontation. He sent the biggest army, as many as 70 to 80,000 Romans and allies, who were butchered at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Roman General Vero had the customary checkerboard pattern, while Hannibal assumed an inverted crescent. He had put the strongest of his Carthaginians on the sides, leaving a weak middle. They were outnumbered 2-1. His charioteers were stalling Roman horsemen, and the Romans began pushing the middle back. The Romans gained much ground, but they had also overextended themselves. The strongest Carthaginians had not moved an inch, making Carthage into a half-circle shape. Just then, the Libyan spearmen and the Carthaginian cavalry reared around and closed off the circle. The massacre was so intense that the Romans started to dig holes and to bury their heads to suffocate rather than be murdered. 50,000 Romans were found dead, opposed to the Carthaginian loss of 10,000. Most Roman allies wavered as Hannibal and his allies killed the upwards of 175,000 Romans and Italians in over 20 months. Philip V of Macedonia opened a second front against Rome and Illyria, leaving the Roman forces divided. However, being a very proud nation, Rome rejected any thought of peace. Many question why Hannibal didn't storm Rome when she was at her weakest, with her ally abandonment, divided battlefronts, and fearful rumors of numerous crushing defeats. He probably should have taken the city at its knees, but we will never know the full extent of Hannibal's decision. It's the biggest what-if in history. About 5 years later, in 211 BC, Hannibal stormed against Rome but could not sustain a long foothold. By 209 BC, Rome regained most of her cities and built up their largest military. Hannibal's brother and his army were destroyed at Metaurus by Scipio Africanus, who completed the Roman conquest of Hispania, and a large Carthaginian fleet was destroyed. Hannibal was called to Africa. He attempted to make peace before the battle, but Rome, wanting to be done with it, would not compromise. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio met Hannibal and his beasts on the battlefield. It was clear Scipio had been studying Hannibal's battle tactics when his ranks swiftly moved to create pathways when the elephants charged, allowing them right through. They then killed the drivers and drove the elephants back to wreak havoc among the Carthaginians. The Romans lost about 2,000 men, while the Carthaginians lost 10 times as many. Amazingly, Hannibal escaped, and Carthage admitted defeat under dire circumstances with dire consequences. Under the peace terms, they surrendered all territories outside of Africa, agreed to wage war only with Rome's permission, and paid 5,000 talents that was later increased to 10,000. Carthage was broken while Rome stood as the most powerful presence in the western Mediterranean. Things to know before I continue. This peace treaty stated that for 50 years they couldn't have an army and the debt was to be paid off, or so they thought. Post-war, Carthage suffered from financial issues. They elected Hannibal as chief magistrate, who reformed taxes, economized, and allowed Carthage to thrive. They still blamed Hannibal for not sacking Rome when he had the chance, and he eventually was exiled. Ironically, Scipio defended Hannibal and declared him to be honorable. The Romans became jealous of Carthage. Cato, a Roman ambassador, came back from Carthage with a brilliant piece of fig as an example of their prosperity that he believed should dwell in Rome. In the Senate, he ended his every speech with "Carthage must be destroyed." Not allowed to have an army of their own, Carthage appealed to Rome for help when the Numidians began attacking, but Rome never responded, and sided with the Numidians. In 150 BC, believing the 50-year terms had expired and their debt paid off, they could now fight back. They pushed the Numidians back. Rome, being Rome, believed that 50 years applied only to the debt and they couldn't have an army indefinitely. Looking for an excuse for war, Rome considered the treaty breached and believed Carthage should be razed. Carthage insisted they didn't violate it, but Rome had made up their mind. The Third Punic War was the assault on the city of Carthage, of which its people nobly resisted for 3 years, until its walls were breached in 146 BC and their defenses were compromised. The nation met its demise. Under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, Scipio Africanus' adopted grandson, the last 50,000 Carthaginians surrendered the citadel, were sold into slavery, and the land was forever cursed and salted. Hannibal's superior battle strategies were used and studied by the Romans and others through today. Meanwhile, Hannibal became a boogeyman legend used by mothers to scare their children to bed by saying, "Hannibal is at the door." The Romans never would have become a world empire without the Punic Wars, where they developed a solid navy, became a dominant trader, obtained significant territories, and learned incredible battle tactics that were used to increase the size of the future empire. Their refusal to compromise led to conflict that reduced a large power to ashes and made Rome a rising world empire.